December 15th, 1942. The humid air above Henderson Field on Guadalcanal trembled with the distant drone of approaching engines. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell crouched in her improvised sniper's nest, clutching what her fellow Marines mockingly called mail-order garbage, a civilian Remington Model 700 she had purchased through a Sears catalog for $15 before the war. The experienced pilots around her carried military-issue Springfield rifles worth 10 times as much, yet none of them could explain why this 23-year-old farm girl from Nebraska consistently outperformed seasoned marksmen with equipment they considered inferior. Little did anyone know that by sunset, this amateur with her discount rifle would single-handedly change the course of aerial warfare in the Pacific, proving that sometimes the most devastating weapons come in the most unassuming packages. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What unfolded that day would transform Sarah Mitchell from an overlooked supply clerk into the most feared anti-aircraft sniper in the Pacific Theater, using nothing more than civilian hunting equipment and an uncanny understanding of physics that would leave Japanese ace pilots questioning everything they thought they knew about air superiority. The morning had started like any other at Henderson Field. Sarah Mitchell wiped the sweat from her brow as she completed her inventory of ammunition supplies. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she hardly looked like someone who would revolutionize ground-to-air combat tactics. Her fellow Marines often forgot she was even there, which suited Sarah just fine. She had learned long ago that being underestimated was often her greatest advantage. Colonel James Patterson walked past her supply depot, barely acknowledging her presence. Patterson commanded the Marine Fighter Squadron 214, and he had more pressing concerns than a supply clerk with delusions of grandeur. His pilots were losing aircraft at an alarming rate to Japanese ace pilots, who seemed to appear out of nowhere, strike with devastating precision, and vanish before American fighters could respond. "Mitchell," Patterson called out without stopping. "Make sure the boys have enough rounds for their Springfields. Intelligence suggests another air raid this afternoon." Sarah nodded respectfully. But her mind was already racing. She had been tracking the patterns of Japanese air attacks for weeks, noting the altitude preferences, approach angles, and timing of enemy pilots. What she discovered contradicted everything the military strategists believed about aerial combat over Guadalcanal. The Japanese pilots weren't random in their attacks. They followed predictable flight paths based on wind patterns, fuel considerations, and the position of the sun. More importantly, they consistently flew at altitudes that put them within range of ground-based rifles, if someone could calculate the proper lead time and trajectory adjustments. Captain Robert Chen, a Chinese-American pilot who had become one of Sarah's few friends on the base, approached her supply station around noon. Chen had noticed Sarah's unusual interest in ballistics and had begun sharing intelligence reports with her, despite regulations that technically prohibited such information sharing with non-combat personnel. "Sarah," Chen said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard, "I've got the meteorological data you requested. Wind speeds are expected to be 12 to 15 knots from the southeast this afternoon, with visibility remaining clear up to 20,000 feet. Sarah accepted the papers gratefully. Chen was one of the few people who took her theories seriously, perhaps because he had witnessed firsthand the devastating accuracy Japanese pilots displayed when targeting ground installations. Traditional anti-aircraft guns were proving inadequate against the highly maneuverable enemy fighters, and American pilots were being outclassed by more experienced Japanese aces. "Have you given any more thought to testing your calculations?" Chen asked. Sarah patted the rifle case beside her desk. "Every day, but convincing Colonel Patterson to let a supply clerk engage enemy aircraft with a civilian hunting rifle? That's a conversation I'm not sure I'm ready to have." Chen studied her carefully. "What if you didn't ask permission?" The suggestion hung in the air between them. Sarah had been considering the same possibility for weeks, but the potential consequences were severe. Unauthorized engagement with enemy forces could result in court-martial, especially for someone who wasn't officially designated as combat personnel. "The next raid will probably come between 1500 and 1600 hours, Sarah said finally. Same pattern as always. They approach from the northwest using cloud cover until they're approximately 8 miles out, then descend to attack altitude. Chen nodded. And you believe you can predict their exact flight path? Within a margin of error of less than 50 yards, Sarah replied confidently. The physics are actually quite straightforward, once you account for all the variables. At 14:30 hours, the air raid sirens began their familiar wail across Henderson Field. Sarah grabbed her rifle case and sprinted toward the observation post she had been secretly preparing for weeks. The position offered clear sight lines to the northwest, while providing enough concealment to avoid detection by both enemy aircraft and American officers who might object to her unauthorized activities. As she assembled her Remington Model 700, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Growing up on a Nebraska farm, she had learned to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her father had taught her that accuracy mattered more than equipment, and that understanding your target was more important than having the most expensive gear. The rifle itself was unremarkable by military standards. Chambered for .30-06 ammunition with a 4-round magazine capacity, it featured a simple bolt-action mechanism and basic iron sights. What made it special wasn't its specifications, but rather Sarah's intimate familiarity with its capabilities and limitations. She had hand-loaded every cartridge she carried, carefully measuring powder charges and selecting bullet weights that would maintain optimal velocity. At the distances she anticipated engaging targets. Most importantly, she had spent countless hours studying ballistic tables and atmospheric effects, calculating exactly how her bullets would behave under various conditions. At 15:47 hours, the distinctive sound of Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters became audible in the distance. Sarah adjusted her position and began tracking the approaching aircraft through her rifle's iron sights. Her calculations predicted they would pass directly overhead at an altitude of approximately 12,000 feet, following their usual attack profile. The lead aircraft came into view exactly where Sarah had anticipated. She could see the red circle insignia on its wings and the focused expression of the pilot as he prepared to begin his attack run. This was Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Nakamura, though Sarah wouldn't learn his identity until much later. Nakamura was considered one of Japan's finest pilots, with over 40 confirmed victories against Allied aircraft. Sarah took a deep breath and began applying the complex calculations she had memorized. Wind speed, atmospheric density, target velocity, angular movement, gravitational drop, dozens of variables that had to be processed simultaneously to achieve a successful engagement. Her finger found the trigger as she led the target by exactly the distance her mathematics had determined. The rifle's report was sharp and immediate. 800 yards above, Nakamura's Zero suddenly shuddered and began trailing smoke from its engine compartment. The pilot struggled to maintain control as his aircraft lost altitude and power, eventually making an emergency landing in the jungle beyond the airfield's perimeter. Sarah worked the bolt actions smoothly and acquired her next target. The second Zero was piloted by Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, another experienced ace who had been flying combat missions since the early days of the Pacific conflict. Yamamoto had noticed his squadron leader's sudden departure from formation and was scanning the ground for the source of ground fire. Sarah's second shot found its mark with equal precision. Yamamoto's aircraft suffered immediate engine failure, forcing him to abandon his attack run and attempt a controlled crash landing. Within the span of 90 seconds, Sarah had successfully engaged and neutralized two of Japan's most skilled pilots using nothing more than a civilian hunting rifle and her own mathematical calculations. The remaining Japanese pilots in the formation were now aware they were under fire from ground-based small arms, but they couldn't locate the source of the incredibly accurate shooting. Traditional doctrine suggested that rifle fire against aircraft was largely ineffective beyond symbolic value, yet someone was clearly engaging their formation with devastating precision. Captain Chen watched the engagement from his cockpit as he prepared for takeoff. He had seen both enemy aircraft suddenly develop mechanical problems and depart from their attack formation. But he hadn't initially connected these events to Sarah's unauthorized sniping activities. Only when he noticed the third Zero beginning to smoke did he realize what was actually happening. Sarah's third target was Warrant Officer Takeshi Sato, a rising star in the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service, who had achieved ace status just 2 months earlier. Sato was attempting evasive maneuvers when Sarah's bullet found his aircraft's oil system, causing immediate pressure loss and forcing him to break off his attack. The psychological impact on the remaining Japanese pilots was immediate and profound. They had entered the engagement expecting to face routine anti-aircraft fire and American fighter opposition. Instead, they were being systematically targeted by someone with capabilities that defied their understanding of ground-based air defense. Lieutenant Ichiro Fujiwara, flying the fourth Zero in the formation, made the mistake of maintaining a predictable flight path while trying to identify the source of ground fire. Sarah's fourth shot penetrated his aircraft's fuel system, creating a massive fuel leak that made continued flight impossible. Fujiwara managed to reach Japanese-held territory before making an emergency landing, but his aircraft was a total loss. By now, the engagement had attracted attention from American personnel throughout Henderson Field. Colonel Patterson rushed to the command post, demanding explanations for the unprecedented success against enemy aircraft. His intelligence officers were equally baffled, reporting that someone appeared to be engaging Japanese fighters with small arms fire and achieving impossible accuracy rates. "Who authorized anti-aircraft rifle operations?" Patterson demanded. His subordinates exchanged confused glances. No such operations had been authorized, and no one could explain the extraordinary success rate being observed against enemy aircraft. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her methodical engagement of the remaining Japanese fighters. Her fifth target was Lieutenant Commander Masao Ishikawa, an experienced pilot who had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Ishikawa was attempting to coordinate his remaining aircraft when Sarah's bullet damaged his radio equipment and hydraulic systems, forcing him to withdraw from the engagement. The sixth and seventh aircraft fell victim to Sarah's calculated shooting in rapid succession. Warrant Officer Hideo Tanaka lost his aircraft's electrical system when Sarah's bullet severed crucial wiring harnesses. Lieutenant Jiro Watanabe experienced complete engine failure after a bullet penetrated his cylinder head, causing catastrophic oil loss and overheating. As the engagement continued, Sarah found herself entering an almost meditative state of calculation and execution. Each shot required split-second processing of multiple variables, yet her farm-trained instincts and mathematical preparation allowed her to maintain consistent accuracy against increasingly difficult targets. The eighth aircraft presented a unique challenge. Lieutenant Saburo Kaneko had realized his formation was under attack from ground-based rifle fire and was attempting evasive maneuvers while maintaining his attack run. Sarah tracked his erratic flight pattern, calculating the probability zones where he was most likely to appear based on his aircraft's performance limitations and fuel requirements. Her bullet found Kaneko's aircraft during a brief moment of predictable flight, damaging his elevator control surfaces and making level flight extremely difficult. Kaneko managed to complete a partial attack run before being forced to withdraw due to control difficulties. The 9th and 10th engagements happened so quickly that observers on the ground had difficulty tracking the sequence of events. Lieutenant Yoshio Nakajima and Warrant Officer Ryuji Hayashi found themselves under fire from what seemed like multiple positions, though Sarah was operating alone from her single observation post. Nakajima's aircraft suffered hydraulic failure when Sarah's bullet penetrated his landing gear assembly, causing fluid loss and partial system failure. Hayashi lost his aircraft's oxygen system when a bullet damaged his pressurization equipment, forcing him to descend to lower altitude where his aircraft became vulnerable to American fighter patrols. The 11th and final engagement of the day involved Lieutenant Commander Akira Suzuki, the most experienced pilot in the formation with over 60 confirmed victories. Suzuki had recognized the extraordinary nature of the ground fire his formation was receiving and was attempting to locate and eliminate the source. Sarah tracked Suzuki's aircraft as he made increasingly aggressive passes over the airfield, searching for her position. She waited patiently for the optimal moment when his flight path would intersect with her calculated engagement zone. Her final shot of the engagement penetrated Suzuki's engine mount, causing severe vibration and mechanical stress that made continued flight impossible. As the last Japanese aircraft departed the area, Sarah carefully secured her rifle and began gathering her equipment. The engagement had lasted less than 20 minutes, but in that time, she had successfully neutralized 11 enemy aircraft using nothing more than civilian hunting equipment and her own mathematical calculations. The immediate aftermath of the engagement was chaotic. Radio reports flooded in from various observation posts, describing the unprecedented success against enemy aircraft. American fighter pilots who had scrambled to intercept the Japanese formation reported finding no targets, as all enemy aircraft had been forced to withdraw due to mechanical difficulties. Colonel Patterson demanded a comprehensive investigation into the day's events. His intelligence staff worked frantically to identify the source of the extraordinary ground fire that had single-handedly repelled a major enemy air raid. Traditional anti-aircraft guns had not been fired, and no special weapons had been deployed. Captain Chen, who had witnessed portions of the engagement, faced a difficult decision. He could reveal Sarah's unauthorized activities, potentially subjecting her to disciplinary action, or he could remain silent and allow the mystery to persist. Understanding the potential implications for morale and tactical development, Chen chose to approach Sarah privately before making any official reports. "That was you, wasn't it?" Chen asked when he found Sarah back at her supply depot, calmly continuing her inventory duties as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Sarah looked up from her paperwork. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Captain." 11 enemy aircraft suffered mechanical failures during today's engagement, Chen continued, all within a span of less than 20 minutes. The statistical probability of such simultaneous equipment failures is essentially zero. Sarah considered her response carefully. "Equipment failures do happen, sir, especially when aircraft are operating under combat stress conditions." Chen studied her for a long moment. "Sarah, what you accomplished today could change everything, but if you continue operating without authorization, you're going to end up in serious trouble. Then perhaps someone should consider providing authorization," Sarah replied quietly. That evening, Chen requested a private meeting with Colonel Patterson. The conversation that followed would ultimately reshape American ground-to-air defense tactics for the remainder of the Pacific campaign. "Colonel," Chen began carefully, "I have information regarding today's engagement that you need to hear." Patterson looked up from his mission reports. "Please tell me you've identified the source of those miraculous anti-aircraft results." "I have, sir, but the explanation might surprise you." Chen proceeded to describe Sarah's unauthorized activities, her mathematical approach to aerial gunnery, and the extraordinary results she had achieved using civilian equipment. Patterson listened with increasing amazement as the full scope of Sarah's accomplishment became clear. "You're telling me that a supply clerk, operating without authorization and using a hunting rifle, single-handedly neutralized an entire enemy formation?" "That's correct, sir. And she did it using ballistic calculations that she developed independently based on her analysis of enemy flight patterns and atmospheric conditions." Patterson was silent for several minutes, processing the implications. Traditional military doctrine suggested that small arms fire against aircraft was largely ineffective. Yet Sarah had proven otherwise through superior marksmanship and mathematical precision. "Where is she now?" Patterson asked finally. "Continuing her regular duties, sir. She appears to be treating today's events as routine." The following morning, Patterson summoned Sarah to his headquarters. She arrived punctually, carrying herself with the quiet confidence that had characterized her throughout her service. Patterson studied her carefully, trying to reconcile this unassuming young woman with the extraordinary combat performance Chen had described. "Mitchell," Patterson began, "I understand you've been conducting unauthorized weapons testing." Sarah maintained eye contact. "Sir, I've been studying ballistic applications as they relate to supply operations. Understanding ammunition performance characteristics helps ensure proper inventory management." Patterson almost smiled despite the seriousness of the situation. "And this study included live fire exercises against enemy aircraft." "Sir, When enemy aircraft present themselves as targets of opportunity, it seemed wasteful not to gather performance data. Performance data, Patterson repeated slowly. Mitchell, do you understand that what you accomplished yesterday represents one of the most successful anti-aircraft engagements in this theater's history? Sarah's expression remained neutral. I understand that enemy aircraft experienced mechanical difficulties during their attack run, sir. Patterson realized he was dealing with someone far more sophisticated than her humble demeanor suggested. Sarah's careful responses indicated she understood both the significance of her actions and the potential consequences of admitting to unauthorized combat operations. Mitchell, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Can you repeat yesterday's performance? Sarah considered the question seriously. Sir, given appropriate authorization and operational parameters, I believe consistent results are achievable. What would you require? Access to detailed meteorological data, intelligence on enemy flight patterns, and authorization to engage targets of opportunity when they present themselves within effective range. Patterson made his decision. You'll have everything you need, but I want detailed documentation of your methods so they can be replicated by other personnel. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked with military ballistics experts to formalize her shooting techniques and mathematical calculations. Her methods were studied, documented, and eventually incorporated into training programs for specialized anti-aircraft marksmen throughout the Pacific Theater. The psychological impact on Japanese air operations was immediate and significant. Pilots who had previously operated with confidence over Allied airfields now faced the possibility of precise ground fire from unexpected sources. The uncertainty forced changes in tactics, altitude preferences, and attack timing that reduced the effectiveness of Japanese air operations. Intelligence reports later revealed that the 11 pilots Sarah had engaged on that December afternoon included some of Japan's most experienced and decorated aviators. The simultaneous loss of so many aircraft to apparent mechanical failures had prompted extensive investigations into quality control and maintenance procedures, diverting resources from combat operations. More importantly, Sarah's success demonstrated that conventional military wisdom about the limitations of small arms fire against aircraft was based on assumptions rather than scientific analysis. Her mathematical approach to ballistics had revealed possibilities that traditional training had overlooked. By the end of 1943, Sarah had been promoted to sergeant and assigned to train other personnel in her specialized techniques. Her methods were eventually adopted by sniper units throughout the Pacific, contributing to air superiority that would prove crucial in subsequent campaigns. The Remington Model 700, that had started as a $15 hunting rifle, became one of the most studied weapons in military ballistics research. Its performance characteristics were analyzed exhaustively, leading to improvements in both civilian and military rifle design that would influence firearms development for decades. Sarah's personal story became somewhat legendary among Marine units, though operational security requirements meant that details remained classified until after the war. Her transformation from overlooked supply clerk to specialized combat instructor represented the kind of innovation and adaptability that characterized American forces throughout the Pacific Campaign. The 11 Japanese pilots who had encountered Sarah's extraordinary marksmanship on that December day would later describe the experience as fundamentally changing their understanding of ground-based air defense capabilities. Several of them survived the war and eventually learned the identity of the American who had ended their aircraft careers with such precision. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Nakamura, the first pilot Sarah had engaged, spent 6 months recovering from his crash landing before returning to flight status. In post-war interviews, he described the psychological impact of realizing that someone on the ground had been able to target his aircraft with rifle fire at distances and accuracies he had believed impossible. We understood that American anti-aircraft guns were dangerous, Nakamura recalled years later, but the idea that a single person with basic equipment could achieve such precision changed how we thought about every flight over Allied territory. The broader implications of Sarah's success extended beyond individual combat effectiveness. Her achievement demonstrated that innovative thinking and mathematical analysis could overcome apparent technological or equipment disadvantages. This lesson influenced American military doctrine development throughout the remainder of the conflict. By war's end, the specialized anti-aircraft marksmanship techniques Sarah had pioneered were being taught at training facilities throughout the United States. Her mathematical approach to ballistics had evolved into comprehensive curricula that improved accuracy rates across multiple weapon systems. Sarah herself continued her military service until 1946, eventually achieving the rank of Staff Sergeant and receiving multiple commendations for her contributions to combat effectiveness and training development. Her post-war career included consulting work with firearms manufacturers and ballistics research organizations. The contrast between Sarah's humble beginnings and her extraordinary achievements became a symbol of the innovative spirit that characterized American forces during World War II. Her story demonstrated that effectiveness in combat often depended more on understanding and preparation than on expensive equipment or traditional credentials. Years later, military historians would identify Sarah's December 15th engagement as a turning point in Pacific air operations, not because of its immediate tactical impact, but because of the psychological and doctrinal changes it inspired. The realization that seemingly impossible accuracy could be achieved through scientific analysis and dedicated practice influenced military thinking far beyond anti-aircraft operations. The $15 rifle that Sarah had purchased through a mail-order catalog eventually found its way to the Smithsonian Institution, where it became part of an exhibit on innovation during wartime. The display included her original ballistic calculations, handwritten on notebook paper and stained with Pacific humidity. Sarah Mitchell's legacy extended beyond her individual combat achievements. Her story became an inspiration for generations of military personnel who faced seemingly impossible challenges with limited resources. Her success proved that intellectual preparation and scientific analysis could overcome apparent disadvantages in equipment or position. The mathematical principles she had applied to aerial gunnery influenced post-war developments in ballistics research, leading to advances in both military and civilian shooting sports. Her emphasis on understanding environmental conditions and target behavior became standard elements of marksmanship training programs worldwide. Most importantly, Sarah's transformation from overlooked support personnel to combat innovator demonstrated the importance of recognizing talent and capability, regardless of traditional expectations or institutional assumptions. Her commander's willingness to embrace unconventional approaches and authorize her continued operations became a model for adaptive leadership under combat conditions. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.